Hello. Today I'm going to talk about how to heal many mental health issues and prevent future mental health illnesses with science that is not widely known but should be. There are two major contributors that we can really change that are causing the rapid increase in mental health problems in our world. One is bad science that was widely disseminated, believed, and incorporated into our understanding of the purpose and use of emotions. This science was never validated, and it has now been overturned, but getting the information out about the new information that is validated about how to use emotions is happening far too slow, and many people are suffering while they wait. And the second thing that we need to change is that we're not allowing our children to experience failures. And well, if you make somebody experience a failure and they don't have good habits of thought, it won't necessarily build resilience. It helps people to experience failure when they have support when they're still young, and their parents can be there to help them realize that a failure is not the end of the world. Our suicide rate is currently extremely high, and the age where we're seeing suicides occur is decreasing. The number 2 cause of death for 10-year-olds in our country is suicide. And this is largely the result of children not having resilience. So we have to give them opportunities to learn resilience, and so that they're prepared when something goes wrong. And they know that it's not the end of the world, and they know that things will get better. I want to talk about the emotions thing first. Imagine that you have company coming for dinner, and you've decided to roast a chicken, and you've never done it before. You don't know how to do it. So you get a cookbook, and the cookbook tells you to put a meat thermometer into the chicken and cook it until it's 120 degrees. So that's what you do. But unfortunately, those instructions are wrong. Chickens need to be cooked to about 165 degrees, not 120 degrees. So what you end up with is raw chicken that you're serving your guests. What has happened with our understanding of emotions is no different. In the 1930s, scientists published research that was not validated, that misled us into misunderstandings about what our emotions mean and how we should respond to them. Understanding how our emotions work is like having a cookbook that tells us chicken is done at 165 degrees. And emotions that almost everybody around us thinks don't make sense actually do make sense when we have the right instructions. And they're not difficult to understand. Basically, the new research has confirmed that our emotions are a sensory feedback system, and that they actually work perfectly in almost everyone. What is a sensory feedback system? Well, our eyes are sensory feedback systems. Our nose, our sense of smell, our hearing, our sense of touch, our sense of taste, they are all sensory feedback systems. The researchers actually say that our emotions are probably the earliest sensory feedback system that humans or any living organism developed. They've even demonstrated that one-celled amoebas have a rudimentary emotional feedback system. The difference between amoebas and other animals and humans is that humans don't understand how to use the system. We've been taught to override it. And when we stop doing that, our lives get so much better. I learned how to do this almost 10 years ago. And all of a sudden, my life just started getting better year after year after year. And it actually made sense why it was getting better. So we've been taught to misinterpret the meaning and purpose of our emotions, and it's time to be taught the right way. So emotional guidance is really, really simple. This emotional feedback tells us whether we're moving towards self-actualization or away from self-actualization. What is self-actualization? Well, self-actualization is pretty simple. It's unique to everyone. Your self-actualized self is different than my self-actualized self. That's a good thing. But your self-actualized self is the best potential you that there can be. So whatever your goals and your dreams are, you, with all of those fulfilled, is your current self-actualized self. But the thing is, once you've accomplished everything you want to accomplish, you're no longer the same person. You're someone who is more than you used to be. And that person still has a self-actualized self because your self-actualized self grows as you do. Positive emotions mean that the thoughts you're thinking, the words you're speaking, or the actions you're taking are in the right direction towards self-actualization. They mean keep moving, you're on your path. Now it is best to always give yourself a long-term focus, because a short-term focus, that piece of chocolate cake or that Jack Daniels, may feel better than something else. But if you put a long-term focus on what you want, it will lead you towards long-term goals, and it will actually diminish the positive emotion that someone might feel from doing things that they don't really want to do from a long-term perspective. So use a long-term perspective, pay attention to how you feel, and if it feels good, you're moving in the right direction. How your emotional guidance feedback system works is pretty simple and basic. We think about 60,000 thoughts a day. We cannot pay attention to 60,000 thoughts a day. But essentially what is happening is you think the thought, it's compared to your highest level of self-actualization, and then the thought either feels better or worse or the same as the thought you thought prior to the current thought. So for this illustration, all the thoughts are on the same subject. So let's say that you're thinking about a long-term goal. Maybe it's career-oriented, maybe it's relationship-oriented, maybe it's health-oriented. It really doesn't matter. But you're thinking about a thought on one subject, and let's say it doesn't feel all that great. So what you do is you think about what you're thinking and think, is there a better way for me to look at this situation? And then when you find a thought that feels better, pay attention to how the other alternative thoughts about the situation feel. When you find a thought that feels better, your emotional guidance is telling you, yes, that thought is moving you towards what you want. Now, feeling better does not necessarily mean feeling good. If you've been depressed or you've been feeling helpless, your better feeling thought may feel angry. That's okay. You just don't want to build a house in anger. You want to keep going. You want to move up to frustration or blame or irritation. You want to keep going, but it's a step-by-step process. You can't jump from anger to joy. So when you think a thought and then you look for another thought on the same subject, it's either going to feel worse, which means you're heading in the wrong direction. It's going to feel the same, which means you haven't moved, which if you're feeling good, that's not a bad thing. If you're not feeling good, you want to keep looking for a thought that feels better. Other ways, we tend to feel our thoughts viscerally in our body. So some people will describe a thought that feels worse as feeling heavier, or one that feels better as feeling lighter. So you can also use your body to help you realize how different thoughts feel. paying attention to how you feel, and then thoughts that don't feel good, work to find different ways of looking at those thoughts and ask yourself, what other ways could I look at this situation? And it will help you find different thoughts about the situation. There's a lot of techniques, and this mini presentation is not long enough to include the techniques that will help you do this and help you easily find better feeling thoughts. Those are included in my books, and I teach them in my programs. So negative emotion means you're moving away from self-actualization. And a lot of people will think that negative emotions are validating their perspective. Well, they're validating whether that perspective is on your path or not. They are not saying, oh yeah, your anger is righteous. Your anger is simply how you feel from a particular perspective. So the best solution to negative emotion is to stop, simply pause, and think. Is there a different way I could look at this situation? What if I gave this person or this situation the benefit of the doubt? What if I gave God or the universe the benefit of the doubt that this would work out well for me? One example that happens to me frequently is I'll make a wrong turn. And in the old days before I understood this, oh, I'd beat myself up for making that wrong turn. And then I started simply trusting that my wrong turn was a happy accident. And then I started hearing things like I missed my turn one night coming home from work. And the next day I'm talking to my neighbor. They sat on the road that I would have been on when I missed my turn for an hour because there was an accident. And there was no traffic on the alternate route I took to get home. And I started really believing that when it seems like something's not working out, it probably is working out. I just didn't know everything about it. So stop and think about how you're looking at a situation. Ask yourself if there's other ways to look at that situation, and give people the benefit of the doubt. Make feeling better more important than being right. When you find a better feeling thought, grab a hold of it. Make it yours. That's when you act, not when you have that first hit of negative emotion. So that's just a simple, basic overview of emotional feedback. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about is what we've done to our children. An external locus of control is a belief that other people, someone bigger than you, or luck, something that the person does not control, determines the outcome of one's life and one's efforts. And the research is showing that an external locus of control is a strongly increasing belief in our children. The average millennial college student in the 2000s had more external control beliefs than 80% of the college students in the early 1960s. This is not a good thing, and we need to turn it around. It's one of the reasons for the high suicide rate and for the high mental health diagnoses that we're seeing. And there's far too many suffering from mental illness that are avoidable. Anxiety and depression more than tripled in the 10-year period from 1987 to 97, and it's only gotten worse since then. In 1987, this little smidgen of the population, 1.8 million, were depressed. By 2002, 6.3 million Americans were depressed. That's a much bigger piece of the pie, and it's gotten worse. In 2014, almost 32 million Americans suffered from depression, and 57 million suffered from anxiety. This is not a good situation for anyone, and especially those who are suffering, but it affects all of us. So one of the things that I'm seeing being promoted heavily, being distributed heavily, and a lot of resources and time going towards is mental health first aid. So I was really hopeful when I saw so much effort being put into mental health first aid, thinking, okay, they're going to be sharing this helpful information about emotional guidance. So I took a good look at mental health first aid. And I also looked at what is first aid, because most of us are familiar with first aid. And I was really, really disappointed with what I saw that mental health first aid is. So with regular first aid for our bodies, we learn things like how to stop the bleeding in a wound and how to apply a tourniquet, which can be really helpful if you're on a hike and you're out in the woods and somebody breaks an arm or breaks a leg. But with mental health first aid, all they teach us is to recognize the signs a person may be suicidal or experiencing another mental health issue like depression or anxiety and other things, and then call for help. Well, just like the person who falls and breaks an arm, sometimes there's no opportunity to call for help when somebody is suffering a mental health problem. The beginning of my book, Prevent Suicide the Smart Way, describes just such a situation and describes how I use the techniques in what I call the Smart Way, which takes that emotional guidance and provides ways of helping people feel better using emotional guidance to stop an imminent suicide when there was no other way to stop it, when there was no way to call for help because the person would not say where they were, and the person, me, who they had called, was 1,000 miles away in any event. So if they wouldn't disclose where they were or what kind of car they were driving, there was no way to call for help. And I'm not the only one who's been in a situation where there is no time to call for help. So the type of first aid that we learn for our physical bodies would be much more useful for more situations than mental health first aid. And the programs we provide at Happiness First Institute teach those skills. Yes, call for help if it's a possibility to get help. But if there's no way to get help and you don't have any skills and you don't have any solutions, you're really in a bad situation. The next thing that mental health first aid does is, okay, with a choking victim, we learn the Heimlich maneuver with first aid. So we can actually intervene and stop someone from choking to death. With mental health first aid, they just teach us how to recognize the signs of non-suicidal self-injury. Things like cutting. But we don't learn anything that will help us help the person stop doing that. Not everybody will go and get help, even when they're doing things that are harmful to themselves. There's still stigma, unfortunately. There shouldn't be, but there's stigma associated with mental health. There are financial barriers, and there's 3,000 counties in the United States that don't have adequate resources to meet their current demand, and that current demand does not include people who need help but won't get it because of stigma or because of financial limitations. So understanding the types of thought processes that lead to non-suicidal self-injury and how to inspire an individual to adopt better feeling thoughts, they could still refer someone who's doing that to help if they'll go. But they also have in their toolbox things they can use to help if the person won't go, or to support the person who does go for help. Because if you go to therapy for 1 hour a week, That's only 1 hour out of very many hours during the week. Also, if somebody goes to therapy, often what they get is a prescription that does not help them change their underlying thoughts. And so they just become, somebody who gets a pill every day and takes that day in, day out for a long time. The next thing that we learn in mental health is to apply pressure to a bleeding wound. In mental health first aid, all they tell us is to recommend professional help. If you're out in the woods with someone and they're bleeding, you can't just call for a doctor. Your cell phone doesn't even work out there. A lot of people die because they think their cell phone will work when they're in the woods, and then they get stuck out there in bad weather and they're unprepared and they can't get help. So you have to know how to do something. So understanding how to bring someone back from the edge of suicidal thoughts and from thoughts of harm to others is a really helpful skill. And then you recommend professional help if it won't be too late in arriving. There's a lot of situations where understanding this information would save lives. And we should be teaching everyone we can possibly reach how to do it. Okay, in first aid, we're taught how to bandage wounds. In mental health first aid, they suggest dose-dependent strategies for stress reduction. What do I mean by dose-dependent? Well, dose-dependent means you have to do it to get the benefit of it. So if you have a headache and you take a pill and it helps your headache, that's a dose-dependent strategy. It doesn't prevent your headache from coming back later. It doesn't prevent your next headache. And the research shows that, for example, one of the dose-dependent strategies for stress reduction is exercise. But 43% of people who know that exercise reduces their stress do not actually exercise when they're highly stressed. They say they feel too stressed to do it. Another thing that is a dose-dependent method of stress reduction is comfort food. Well, that creates other problems. So with the Happiness First program, they learn continuous self-care that promotes good mental health, resilience, kindness, psychological flexibility, and it feels better than any other path, and it's not dose-dependent. The automatic habits of thought actually change to more positive thoughts. The person feels better all the time, and the first instance feels better, not just having to do the processes to feel better. They literally begin seeing life in a different way. In first aid, you learn how to perform CPR in adults, adolescents, and infants. In mental health first aid, they teach people how to listen non-judgmentally. But if somebody's habits of thoughts are judgmental, they're going to be judgmental. And even if their words aren't judgmental, there's so much nonverbal communication, they won't be able to hide the fact that they're actually judging, even if their words seem non-judgmental. That's one of the reasons when minorities go to seek mental health counseling, more often than not, they don't return after the first visit. There's a lack of resonance with many of the therapists that don't understand some of the stresses that they endure, that the minorities endure, that a non-minority mental health professional does not experience. And so communication is not just verbal. It's very much not only physical, but also you can walk in a room and you can feel whether that room is welcoming you or not welcoming you. And it's that nonverbal just sense of whether you're being accepted or not that is so critical. In Happiness First Institute programs, we actually teach people to how to love unconditionally. It is very possible to do, but it requires a focus on looking for the best in others. And it's not something that just using non-judgmental language accomplishes. In regular first aid, we're taught to treat burns and assess whether a physician or hospital treatment is necessary. In mental health first aid, we are taught to assess for risk of suicide or harm, listen non-judgmentally, give reassurance information, encourage appropriate professional help, encourage self-help and other support strategies, and not to challenge what the person is experiencing, to be caring, and to give appropriate choices and let the person be part of the decision-making process. But all of that requires the ability to get someone to go and seek help when they need it. And many people will not do that. We have to get rid of stigma. But until we do, this solution is not optimal. In the Happiness First Institute programs, we increase optimism and positivity gradually but steadily over time, which lowers stress, which then improves physical, mental, emotional, and behavioral health via improved immune, cognitive, digestive, and central nervous system function. This also improves relationships, which are known to improve mental health and reduce the risk of physical and mental illnesses. Good relationships are strongly associated with good mental and good physical health. For situations where medical help is not readily available, regular first aid teaches us how to splint a broken bone. Mental health first aid does nothing for when there's no readily available help. Happiness First Institute's strategies have already successfully averted imminent suicides. They work. Emotional stress is a significant contributor to both mental and physical illnesses. Our immune system declines as stress increases. It is directly linked to heart disease, worse cancer outcomes, and many other physical outcomes that are undesirable. Our digestive function declines when stress increases, which is directly linked to both obesity and diabetes. Our cognitive abilities decline as stress increases. We are literally not as smart when we're stressed as we are when we're not stressed. And the research shows that that lowered cognitive ability makes us make worse decisions about our behaviors and make decisions that are not as good for our health. We're more likely to do things like drive recklessly or have unprotected sex. We're also more likely to eat unhealthy. We're more likely to do drugs or alcohol. And we're more likely to have bad relationships, which has a negative impact on our health. And the central nervous system is also responsive to stress, and its function declines as stress increases. Unfortunately, chronic stress does not just hurt us, it harms our children. Preterm births are strongly associated with chronic stress. The current theory is that there's a biological clock with the placenta, and that stress speeds it up, which results in children who are born prematurely, which has a whole host of potential problems for the child. And it's chronic stresses in the parent is also associated with increased asthma, sleep disorders, and behavior problems in children. And then there's the epigenetic problems. So A lot of people talk about our genetics and our health, but what they've learned lately is that genetics are like switches, and they can be turned on or off. And stress tends to turn negative genetic outcomes on. And this is still an area that science is still exploring and researching, but the evidence that the chronic stress causes worse genetic outcomes is growing rapidly. Too much is at stake. The mental health crisis is growing. It's impacting nearly everybody in some way. If they don't have an issue, somebody they know and love is. We need to begin a public education campaign to teach as many people as possible how to use their emotional feedback system accurately and develop healthy habits of thought. We need to teach all teachers how to use this system and teach it to the children in their care. We need to incorporate policies that reinforce this in our schools. We also need to mandate classes to reach homeschooled children by providing online or programs over cable channels that are cost effective that can teach these skills. We don't want to leave anyone out. For more information, you can contact me in a variety of ways. You can call me. You can contact me on LinkedIn. I'm there nearly every day and check my messages. You can contact me on Twitter. I'm also there nearly every day. If you prefer, I've written 5 different books that talk about these different strategies for reducing stress and improving mental health. True Prevention, Optimum Health. Remember, Galileo focuses on the physical health outcomes from chronic stress. Prevent Suicide the Smart Way is about how to build resilience in advance in order to prevent suicide when something happens. Is Punishment Ethical looks at our criminal justice system and whether it is consistent with things that will actually provide good outcomes. Rescue Our Children from the War Zone is a heavily researched book that describes research that proves we can help even our most at-risk children have better outcomes. And then it demonstrates and provides techniques that parents or teachers can use to teach children these life-changing and life-saving skills. And then Empowered Employees Become Engaged Employees takes this and applies it in the workplace and shows how empowering the employee with these skills improves employee engagement, and that the lack of these skills is the reason employee engagement has been so low for so long. Thank you for watching. I hope you've learned something that makes your life better today and every day in the future. This is Dr. Janine Joy signing off.